Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Joining me right now is Phil Kerpen from American Commitment, AmericanCommitment.org. He's got an essay up at the Washington Examiner talking about Trump's reckless war on credit cards. And this is something that kind of concerned me too, was that Donald Trump had talked about taking some sort of action to limit credit card interest rates to, I think 10% was the cap that he was talking about. And while that sounds good, it has some very, there are some things that will happen as a result if that actually takes place. Phil is going to talk to us about that, as well as what Trump can actually do in these terms. But more to the point, what the policy is, because we should talk about why credit cards are the way they are. And Phil, I mean, anybody who's been on the end of an APR that's in double digits is probably going to react positively to somebody saying, well, this is out of control and this is, it's ridiculous how much they charge, but there's a reason for this. And it's not a reason that people want to sort of fess up to.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, like a lot of conservative activists, I've been fighting against these efforts to regulate credit cards, both the swipe fees and the interest rates. And the president has endorsed regulating both of those, capping both the sources of funding for credit cards, both the swipe fees and the interest rates that are charged. And I think, like a lot of conservative activists, I've been fighting these proposals for many years when they come from AOC and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And I think it's really easy when you're arguing against left-wing Democrat politicians that want price controls to say, this is terrible, it's a price control, it's going to backfire, and you sort of will kind of automatically have the power of negative partisanship that most of your audience will agree with you. Now, when President Trump says it becomes a lot more difficult, because the automatic response of a lot of my audience, and probably yours, is to want to go along with him because he's right more often than he's wrong, the opposite of saying AOC or Bernie Sanders. But there's a logic to it when the liberals do it, which is they don't care if private consumer lending exists or not, because they always stand ready to replace it with government programs. And so from their standpoint, hey, if the private sector can't provide the service of, making credit available to people at the rate that we think it ought to be available at, that's fine. It'll go out of business and, we'll do the lending through the post office or through a new government program or whatever it is. Conservatives don't have the benefit of always having the fallback of government taking something over after you overregulate. And I think that that's why we should be much, much more careful before we come out and say, put heavy-handed regulations on something. And, running credit cards, running that business, issuing credit, unsecured loans, which is what credit cards are, that's a pretty tough business to be in, because if people don't pay you back, there's not really much you can do. You can send them nasty letters and calls and try to send it to collections and this kind of thing, but there's no collateral. It's not like a mortgage where you can seize the house, or a car loan where you can repossess the car. With a credit card, there is no collateral, and so it's very risky. It's a very risky business to be in, and to cover your costs, you tend to charge pretty high rates because you're going to have a bunch of bad debts you have to write off. You've got to access the capital yourself, which is not free. You've got administrative costs and so forth, and just the basic costs of running a credit card operation for a bank. The cost of capital plus administration, the losses, writing off bad loans. It's somewhere around 12 to 15%. And if the government says you can only charge 10%, well, the vast majority of that business no longer works. You can no longer issue credit to most of the people who have cards. And I've seen a few different estimates for where this cutoff would be. And, the banks are self-interested, so they may be overstating. So I understand that. But, the first response that I saw to this proposal when the president said it was from a group called the Electronics Payment Coalition, which is, it's the banks essentially, and Visa and MasterCard, I guess, also. And they said they think that everyone with a credit score under 740 would lose credit, which is almost everyone.
Wow. That's a pretty good credit score too.
Yeah. Really that's like 90% of people. Now, I saw another estimate from the American Banking Association, which is a different group of banks, and they think that it would be more like 600 or so. So look, I don't know if it's going to be 80% of people who lose credit cards or 50% or 60%, but no matter whose estimate you look at, credit would be much, much less available. Now, some conservatives I know see that and they think, well, there are biblical prohibitions against lending, and maybe it's a good thing if people don't borrow and they only spend within their means and everything like that, which I'm a little bit sympathetic to. But
I am as
I think
well.
there are two. I think what?
I am as well. But
Yeah,
but
I mean,
I'll let you explain that.
that.
Then I'll get back to you on this. Yeah.
There are a couple of problems with it. One is that just the nature of life is such that you often have unexpected expenses and you don't necessarily have enough money put away for it, even if you do nothing wrong. And access to credit can be a critical safety valve in those situations, especially if you don't have alternatives. If you regulate payday lending out of existence, which I think a lot of the same liberals who want to regulate credit cards have tried to do, and then you get to this situation like I was talking about, where you don't have a private sector option for people, and you're either going to have a new government program or you're going to have illegal lendings, loan sharks, and somebody who might break your legs and something like that. So I think that idea is good aspirationally, of just, hey, nobody should have debt. I think in practice it's problematic. And then the other reason I think it's a huge problem to just say, hey, maybe it's great if half the people or more don't have credit cards anymore, is this is an economy that runs on consumer spending. And if you dramatically limit the amount of spending power that consumers have, I think you probably induce a recession. Now, again, you could say maybe
this is kind of where I was going the other day, which is that it's fine and dandy to say that, but what you're saying is that you are going to cut off a significant part of consumer spending. And and again, you can get back to the whole biblical approach to this and say, well, we're a little too obsessed with consumer spending, and that's probably true, but we are, 70% of our economy is based on consumer spending.
Right. I don't see how you do a 10% cap without inducing a recession, to be honest. And, maybe if you're a huge proponent of it, you say it's worth it. I tend to think not. I think the pain of that would not be worth it. And, I think it's the other thing that I think the problem with the whole way we think about this is annual percentage rate is not necessarily the right way to think about it, because if you're in a tough situation where you've got to carry a balance because you just don't have the money and you have to put something on your credit card, ideally you should be trying to pay that off in a matter of months, not in a matter of years. And if you do that, look, your annual percentage rate might be whatever it is, but you have to divide it by 12 for what it's going to cost you if you only carry it a month. And in fact, if you carry it a month, it's going to be zero probably, because you're going to be within the grace period. But you know what I mean? Another month. So if you use these tools responsibly, you actually can pay no interest at all or very little interest if you don't carry balances for very long. And unless you carry it for a full year, you're not paying that annual rate. And that's the rate if you carry a balance essentially over a full year, although it's a little less than that because of compounding and that kind of thing, but approximately. So I think that's kind of a flaw in how we think about this. And then the other half of what the president has embraced, which I also think would be pretty destructive, is this idea of having the government cap the swipe fees that are charged on individual transactions. And he's actually endorsed both a cap on the interest rates and a cap on the swipe fees. And this one is, we've got a little bit more empirical data on this because it was done. It was done in Dodd-Frank. It was done for debit cards, And basically, millions of people lost their checking accounts. A lot of banks put unwaivable fees on checking accounts, and debit rewards programs basically disappeared. So, there are a few, like PayPal debit has rewards, but the vast majority of debit cards got rid of rewards after the swipe fees were capped, because the way that most of this business works is the swipe fees are not really kept by these companies. They're paid out in rewards. And then they make their money on the interest is what covers their costs. Now, if you push down on interest, they would probably try to scale back on rewards, or they would change the model. But if you're price controlling both of those at the same time, it would be, I think, sort of nuclear in its effect.
Maybe one or the other you could argue, but both at the same time, you're really
both at the same time is extreme. And the other thing, even if you just regulate the swipe fees, I think you would kill most rewards programs, or you would kill rewards programs for everyone but the very sort of most desirable affluent customers, because the way that these credit cards have all been competing with each other, which if you've got the time and the patience for it, you can actually make a ton of money in like cash backs and miles and all of that, because, they compete intensely in this area. But basically, they actually have negative margins on their swipe fees in the aggregate, because the rewards they pay are greater than the swipe fees in the aggregate.
Yeah, because they're going to get the interest. Generally
Yeah,
speaking, they're
right.
going to
So
give you
that's kind of
interest.
how the business model works, right? I mean, if the merchants are paying 3% or 2.5 or 3% or whatever it is, you can afford to pay all of that out in rewards, and sometimes you might even have 4 or 5% on certain cards for certain categories, because you want to have that volume. Maybe most of those customers are never going to carry a balance, but somebody loses a job and then they do, and that's where the interest comes in, and that's also kind of the way that they can attract and retain customers. And so we've got this market that's developed in a way that you know the amazing thing about markets, Ed, is nobody necessarily would have ever designed a system like this, but it came about because consumers love these rewards programs. They're extremely popular. They've become the way that banks compete for their business. And if you're into it, you can do super well. By the way, the IRS says that rewards income is not taxable because it counts as a discount against your purchase price, which, if you're that makes it extra desirable, because in a way, a dollar of rewards income can be worth, depending on what tax bracket you're in and what state you're in, everything worth $2 if you're like a high income person in California or something like that. And so a lot of people love these rewards programs. Also, the rewards programs are now the main source of revenue for the airlines. They make more money on their rewards program deals with the banks than they do actually flying airplanes.
Right.
And so regulating the swipe fees could actually end up putting airlines back in bankruptcy, ironically.
Yeah. This is the part. I mean, we can go right back to Hayek, right? When you start trying to do central control of large economies, you're going to fail, and you're going to fail hard, because there is no way to do that when you have millions and billions of transactions that are going on between millions of people who all are regulating their own self-interest, right? And you can argue, yes, that some of these credit card companies are taking advantage of young adults. Some of them are taking advantage of people who don't really have the means to regulate their own credit lines.
A lot of this also comes from merchants who hate paying those credit card fees. All right, which I relate to. I understand that. I actually used to run a website where we sold a ton of stuff, and I had to pay all those fees. And so I've
been there.
Yeah.
I was in credit card debt when I was a young adult, and it took me a few years. I was out of it by the time I got married, but it took me a few years to get that.
But here's the thing. I was talking about the swipe fees, the merchants.
Swipe fees. Yeah.
I mean, people obviously hate paying the interest too, but merchants hate paying the swipe fees. But very, very few of them say, okay, we're cash only. There's the ATM in the corner. The vast majority of merchants, as much as they hate them, would rather accept credit cards than not, because it's better for their business. And even though surcharges are now becoming a little bit more common than they used to be, they're still pretty uncommon. Most merchants,
I see them though. I see them these days.
Yeah, I mean, and that's fine, I think, right? And,
I mean, I don't want to pay them.
I mean, I hate them as a customer.
Yeah.
I hate them as a customer, but I mean, here's what I'll do. They have a posted surcharge. Now I got to think, is that surcharge more than the cash back I would get? Oh, it is. Here's cash. Is that surcharge less? Okay, here's my card. So this is people make, and that's how the market can address this, right? I mean, give people the choice, have different, try to, but when government comes in and says, we're going to have a price control, or this bill that, it's actually a Republican senator that signed on with Dick Durbin on this bill that the president endorsed, they call it the Credit Card Competition Act. Well, it's pretty deceptively named because the heart of this bill is a routing mandate that says that the merchant can decide what network your card runs on. So you present your card, which you plan to use as a Visa because it gets 3% back or 2% back or whatever it is, and they run it on some cut rate, network that you never heard of. Instead, you don't get your rewards. They pay much less. It doesn't have the security features of the network that you wanted it to run on. And the whole theory behind this, the whole reason they want to do this routing mandate, is that they think then Visa and MasterCard will cut their prices to match, so that they won't lose all their transaction volume, and then it functions like a price control. But what do they say? They say, hey, it's not a price control. This is no, there's no price control in my bill, right? But the only reason you want to do it is for it to have the same effect as a price control, which will cause all the same problems as what we were discussing. So I think merchants can put surcharges on if they want to. They can stop taking cards if they want to. In fact, if this latest settlement that's been proposed is ratified by the courts, merchants for the first time, and this is going to be a nightmare if it happens, to be honest, but I guess it's market. But merchants are going to be allowed to accept some Visa cards and reject other Visa cards, which they could never do before, because the Visa and MasterCard, under their proposed antitrust settlement, have said that they will end their accept one, accept all rule. So you could actually see some stores that say, hey, we'll take your non-rewards card, but we won't take rewards cards because we get a lower transaction fee on the non. So, I think there are a lot of ways this could go. Some of them are going to be kind of annoying, to be honest, but you have to let the market shake it out. That's the only way you don't just create huge problems. And this is not a president who likes that kind of answer. He likes, I'm just going to throw a bomb in there. But
and to be fair though, too, Donald Trump really doesn't have a lot of authority to even affect.
Yeah, well, this is the thing that's interesting.
About, right?
So, I saw Kevin Hassett on TV the other day, the president's chief economist, the CEA director, I guess is the title, and he said we're not regulating, we're just recommending strongly that the banks do this voluntarily or something like that. And it's funny, I actually personally on one of my cards I got a letter from Citibank, like an email, like 3 days after the president said his thing, that was like, congratulations, we've lowered your rate to 9.99%. And I said, okay, well, except, I'm sure, I'm cynical enough to assume they're doing that because of the Trump speech, but I'm also realistic enough to know they can do that for me because I don't really carry a balance. I'm very low risk. They're not sending that to the people that they would lose money if they sent it to. That's the thing.
And I think the thing is that it's all well and good. Yes, they're looking at this, they're trying to, which is good. I mean, again, it's good that was the reaction. But I think the reaction is also going to be that in case the CFPB or some other entity starts leaning on them in terms of APR rates, that they'll simply lower them on their own and start excluding people because they're going to try to lower the risk that goes into that. And that type of impact doesn't actually need to have a government impetus if the banks and the other lending organizations.
It can have the same, you're right. It can, informal government pressure can cause the same adverse consequence as regulation.
Absolutely. And it would be an adverse consequence because it means fewer people get access to credit. And while that may be better for some of the people who get excluded, it's not necessarily true of everybody who gets excluded. And that will reduce consumer activity. It has to, because they simply won't have the credit facility to do some of the consuming that they would probably be able to cover, most of them, if not all of them, under the terms of unsecured credit or credit lines, however you want to describe this credit card.
I also think there's also a paternalistic aspect of this, which I sort of reject, which is this idea we have to protect people from themselves, that, if they get a credit card, they're going to be reckless with it. And, obviously some people will, but it's not government's job, I think, to try to protect people from themselves. And,
I think that there's a line here, right? Because I think you can talk about predatory lending practices. You can talk about predatory credit card rates that are specifically aimed at people who don't have access to credit. If you're charging 50% APR, for instance, maybe there's a government role in saying, no, that's usurious. It's actually.
Well, look, I mean, I'm against government rate caps, regulatory rate caps as a sort of, as a philosophical matter, sort of a basic matter of economics. I don't think they should exist at all. That said, it does matter a lot what the number is if you're going to have one. It does make a big difference. And, the credit unions, for instance, do have a rate cap. They've got an 18% APR cap, and they still issue a lot of credit cards. Now, not as many as banks, and they tend to have slightly tighter underwriting standards, but they've managed to make that business work with that number. They've said that they can't make it work at 10. They think the vast majority of their cards would no longer be viable at 10. So there's sort of the fundamental philosophical matter: should there be caps? And I say no. But even someone who thinks there should be, if you look at the economics, 10% doesn't work.
No, it wouldn't work. You're basically cutting it in less than half, which means that there's the risk then becomes a lot greater for each of the individual losses that you're going to take. This is like insurance. People talk about insurance and get sore about insurance, but insurance properly calibrated is indemnity against actual loss. The problem that we have with insurance companies in our current policy profile, and you and I have talked about this ad infinitum, is that health insurance, and health insurance isn't even really insurance anymore. It is a care profile portfolio. You're not indemnifying against extraordinary loss like you would with auto insurance or home insurance or something
Well,
like
you need
that.
you need a medical exam for life insurance, but not for health insurance. I love that.
Well, that's that too, but I mean, this is basically a patient management plan. These are patient management plans, and it's not really insurance. And insurance really should be about losses, right? Unexpected losses, indemnifying against like hospitalizations, major surgeries, that sort of thing, as indemnity, which is not how health insurance works. So people get very sore at health insurance because having taken that position in an industry, then health insurance has to start saying yes and no to a lot of things that really should be between doctors and patients. And that's the reason why you have all of this anger towards health insurance companies. Well, this is basically credit insurance is what you're talking about. And the APR is the rate that they pay for the risk pool of users of revolving credit, unsecured revolving credit. This doesn't apply to secured credit. It doesn't apply to home loans. It doesn't apply to auto loans.
What you may see that, there is a credit card issuer. I think it's called Avon, I think, or something like that, that actually is a credit card that's secured by home equity. And they've got, I think they've got great terms. It's like 3% cash back, and the credit lines are hundreds of thousands of dollars and all that kind of thing. Now, I would never open that card myself, because even though 3% cash back on everything sounds great, if something, God forbid, happens and you have a balance, they take your house. It's secured by your house. I mean, it's but it does have much, much more favorable terms than any other credit card out there,
because it's secured.
That it's secured.
Yeah.
So I do think that kind of product, which is, sort of an exotic product now, might become, much more common if you had this kind of regulation.
But that would be worse for consumers. That would be worse
I think
for consumers.
So, yeah.
In the long run, it would be worse.
I do not carry that card. Not a product I'm interested in.
No. I totally get it. I'm agreeing with you. I think that, yes. I mean, you could.
I think it's great that it's available for someone who wants it. So that's, I think the point is, understand why these rates are the way they are, and that you can't make something cost less than it costs by government dictate. If you do, you create a massive shortage of it, and that's true for every price control that's ever been tried.
It's true of it's true of consumer product price controls, right? You go to Venezuela and see how well that works out, right?
Well, look, I mean, we had it in the U.S. under Nixon, and it held together enough for him to win a re-election, and then it collapsed, and we had a lost decade. I mean, it was among other things, but no, price controls don't work, and I think President Trump ought to know better. And just to circle back to where I started at the beginning, when AOC and Bernie Sanders proposed this bill. By the way, their bill was 15, although they quickly reintroduced it as 10 after they had the president on board with 10. So it kind of tells you something that he went much lower than where they were. But they've been pretty open. They've been they don't say we know the business can work at this rate. Even when I think at the press conference where they introduced their 15, I think it was Bernie and AOC and Elizabeth Warren. And this was, 4 or 5 years ago now. They introduced this bill and they said something along the lines of if they can't make it work at this rate, then we'll have to do consumer lending through the government instead. Yeah, I mean, it was they were they don't care if it destroys it at the business.
Student loans. It's student loans all over.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, student loans are the exact, you and I look at student lending and we say, wow, this has been a disaster since it's been nationalized. It's all political. So many of these loans are just never going to be paid. Taxpayers are going to eat the costs. They look at it and they say, well, this is amazing because, we destroyed a private industry. Government has all this power, and we can forgive loans for political advantage anytime we want to. So the same reason we think that's a disaster, they think it's great.
Right.
So then the question is, why is any Republican, okay with the regulatory half of this that potentially kills the private sector lending and leads to, takes the step down that path?
Well, there you go. It's a good question. We're going to leave it at that, though. But go over to AmericanCommitment.org. And check out that Washington Post, not Washington Post, Washington Examiner.
Post passed on it. I actually did send it to them.
I only wish that. Well, the Post these days is trying to improve matters. Maybe at some point they'll start carrying this kind of content. But in the meantime, go to Washington Examiner, because that's where this essay actually is. You can go to AmericanCommitment.org. You can find out more there. You can find Phil Kerpen on Twitter at Kerpen, Kerpen, by the way. And so follow him there. And that way you'll get a heads up on all this stuff that's going on out there, as opposed to following me, because as I'm recording this, I have a piece up that's queued up for Star Trek Starfleet Academy, something that nobody should actually have any interest in whatsoever. And I wax on for 1,300 words about how no one should have any interest.
I'm not. A lot of these more recent Trek spinoffs are not doing it for me, to be honest.
Ooh, I'll tell you what. I was
Sounds like
prepared
you
to be philosophical.
No.
I was prepared to be philosophical about it, but no, it's as bad as everybody says it is. I sat through both episodes.
I will say that I thought Picard season 3 was really good, but
everybody says that,
because it was like just a Next Generation reunion. You know, it was just blatant fan service, but it worked. It was well done.
I got to see it. I never did actually watch the Picard series. I heard great things about it, but
you can skip the first 2 seasons and watch the third.
Okay, well, there you go. And I've got Paramount Plus. It's the reason why I even bothered to watch episode 2, because I was already paying for Paramount Plus. So I figured I may as well watch both.
I turned it on a Black Friday deal, watched all of Landman, and now I'm going to let it expire. So
there you go. That's a strategy too. All right, Phil Kerpen, he knows all the strategies. Follow him on Twitter at Kerpen. Phil, we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, have a good one, Ed.